I still remember the exact moment. My sister Amanda looked me in the eye at her wedding reception and said, "You know what, Jessica? You're worthless. You've always been worthless, and you always will be." The entire bridal party went silent. Her new husband Michael shifted uncomfortably. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My parents pretended they didn't hear, but what happened next? Well, let's just say the venue owner walking over and saying, "Hi, boss," changed everything. Sometimes, life has a funny way of serving justice, exactly when you need it most. The smell of fresh coffee and vanilla candles always takes me back to that morning in October, when everything started to unravel. I was 22, sitting in my tiny studio apartment in Millbrook, scrolling through my phone while my laptop hummed with the sound of another failed job application being sent into the digital void. The rent notice on my kitchen counter glared at me like a disappointed parent, and my bank account had exactly $47.32 to its name. That's when my phone buzzed with a text from my mother, Linda. "Family dinner tonight. Amanda has big news. Be there at 6 sharp." Dress nicely for once. Even through a text message, I could hear her disapproving tone. My mother had a special talent for making me feel small without even trying. Actually, scratch that. She was definitely trying. I glanced at my reflection in the black screen of my laptop. Messy brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, no makeup, wearing the same oversized sweater I'd had since college. My sister Amanda, on the other hand, was everything I wasn't. Beautiful, successful, confident. She worked as a marketing coordinator at the biggest firm in our county, drove a brand new Honda Civic, and had been dating Michael Thompson, the assistant manager at the local bank, for 3 years. Everyone in our family treated her like she was destined for greatness while I was destined for, well, nothing. The family dinner was exactly what I expected. Amanda sat at the head of our dining room table like a queen holding court, her perfectly manicured hands folded in front of her as she smiled that practice smile she'd perfected since high school. Michael sat beside her, looking nervous but excited. My father, Robert, carved the roast beef with surgical precision, while my mother fluttered around serving mashed potatoes and green beans like this was some kind of state dinner. "So," Amanda announced, her voice dripping with theatrical drama, "Michael and I have something to tell you all." She paused for effect, making sure all eyes were on her. It was such a typical Amanda move. Everything had to be a performance with her. "We're engaged!" The room erupted in the kind of chaos you'd expect. My mother actually squealed and dropped her serving spoon. My father set down his carving knife and walked around the table to shake Michael's hand with the kind of firm grip that said, "Welcome to the family, son." Everyone was hugging and crying and talking over each other about wedding dates and venues and dress shopping. I sat there trying to smile and nod at the right moments, but something cold had settled in my stomach. Not jealousy, exactly. More like the familiar feeling of being invisible. Of being the sister who never quite measured up. The one who couldn't even hold down a job at the local coffee shop for more than 3 months. "Jessica," my mother said suddenly, her voice cutting through the celebration like a knife. "Aren't you going to congratulate your sister?" All eyes turned to me. Amanda was looking at me with that expectant expression she always wore when she wanted me to acknowledge how amazing she was. Michael looked uncomfortable, like he sensed the undercurrent of tension in the room. My parents were both staring at me with barely concealed disappointment, as if my reaction would somehow determine whether I was worthy of being part of this family moment. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "Congratulations," I managed, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. "That's really great news." Amanda's smile faltered slightly. "You could sound a little more excited for me." "I am excited." I lied. "I'm just surprised, that's all." "Well, get used to it," she said, her tone shifting from sweet to sharp. "Because you're going to be my maid of honor, and I expect you to actually put some effort in for once. This is the most important day of my life, and I won't have you ruining it by being your usual disappointing self." The words hit me like a slap. My father cleared his throat awkwardly. My mother busied herself with clearing plates that didn't need to be cleared. Michael studied his hands like they held the secrets of the universe. And Amanda just sat there, looking pleased with herself for putting me in my place. "Of course," I whispered. I'd be honored. But even as I said it, I could feel something breaking inside me. Not breaking apart, exactly. More like breaking open. Like a shell cracking, to let something new emerge. I didn't know it then, but that dinner was the beginning of everything changing. That night was when I stopped trying to be the person my family wanted me to be and started figuring out who I actually was. After dinner, I walked home through the quiet streets of Millbrook, past the old courthouse and the antique shops that closed at 5, and the diner that had been serving the same menu since 1952. This town had always felt too small for my dreams, but I'd never had the courage to leave. I'd always been too afraid of failing somewhere new when I was already failing so spectacularly at home. But something was different that night. Maybe it was the way Amanda had looked at me like I was nothing. Maybe it was the way my parents had just sat there and let her treat me like that. Or maybe it was just the fact that I was tired of being tired. Tired of apologizing for taking up space. Tired of shrinking myself to make other people comfortable. When I got back to my apartment, I didn't turn on the television, or scroll through social media, or do any of the mindless things I usually did to avoid thinking about my life. Instead, I sat at my tiny kitchen table and opened my laptop. I stared at the blank document on my screen for a long time, cursor blinking like a heartbeat. Then I started typing. I wrote about an idea I'd had months ago, but never had the courage to pursue. An online platform that would connect local businesses with freelance marketing professionals. Small towns like Millbrook were full of family-owned shops and restaurants that needed help with social media and advertising, but couldn't afford to hire full-time marketing staff. Meanwhile, there were people like me, people with degrees and ideas but no opportunities, who could provide those services remotely. I'd been thinking about it for months, sketching out business plans on napkins, and researching competitors during my lunch breaks at whatever temporary job I was working that week. But I'd never actually done anything about it, because I was too scared, too convinced that I wasn't smart enough, or experienced enough, or brave enough to start my own business. But sitting there in my kitchen that night, with Amanda's words still echoing in my head, I realized I had two choices. I could keep living like this, accepting everyone's low expectations and proving them right, or I could bet on myself for once and see what happened. I worked until 3 in the morning, researching web development platforms, and writing business proposals, and creating mock-ups of what the website could look like. By the time I finally went to bed, I had the skeleton of a business plan, and something I hadn't felt in years: hope. The next few weeks blurred together in a caffeine-fueled haze of learning and planning and building. I taught myself basic web design through YouTube tutorials. I reached out to former classmates who worked in tech and asked a million questions about user experience and payment processing, and search engine optimization. I spent every spare dollar I had on a decent domain name and hosting service. Most importantly, I started reaching out to local businesses. I began with the coffee shop where I'd briefly worked, offering to manage their Instagram account for free just to build a portfolio. Then the bookstore downtown. Then the family restaurant that had been struggling since the pandemic. One by one, I started building relationships and proving that I could deliver results. Within 2 months, I had 12 clients paying me small monthly fees to manage their online presence. It wasn't enough to quit my day job yet, but it was something. It was proof that maybe I wasn't as worthless as everyone seemed to think. The whole time, Amanda was planning her wedding with the intensity of a military campaign. Every conversation with my mother turned into a detailed discussion of flower arrangements and seating charts. Every family gathering became a strategy session about photographers and caterers, and whether the bridesmaids should wear dusty rose or blush pink. I threw myself into my role as maid of honor with the same determination I was putting into my business. I organized the bridal shower, coordinated the bachelorette party, and listened to Amanda complain about everything from the cost of the venue to the incompetence of the wedding planner she'd hired. Through it all, I kept my mouth shut and did what was expected of me, but inside I was changing. My business was growing faster than I'd ever imagined. Word of mouth was powerful in a small town, and satisfied clients were referring their friends and business associates. By month 4, I was making more from my freelance work than I was from my part-time job at the department store. By month 6, I was able to quit the day job entirely and focus on building my company full-time. I moved out of my studio apartment and into a small one-bedroom place with actual windows and a kitchen table big enough to spread out my work. I bought a decent computer and a good camera for client photo shoots. I started hiring other freelancers to help with the workload. What had started as a desperate attempt to prove my worth was becoming a real business with real employees and real potential. But I didn't tell my family about any of it. I'm not sure why I kept it secret at first. Maybe I was afraid they wouldn't believe me. Maybe I was protecting myself from their skepticism and unsolicited advice. Or maybe I just wanted to see how far I could go without their input or approval. For the first time in my life, I was doing something that was entirely mine, and I wasn't ready to share it. Amanda's wedding was scheduled for the first Saturday in June at Riverside Gardens, the most expensive venue in the county. It was the kind of place that required a 2-year waiting list and a deposit that cost more than most people's cars. Amanda had been dreaming about getting married there since we were teenagers, and somehow Michael's family had connections that made it possible. 3 weeks before the wedding, during our final dress fitting, Amanda pulled me aside after the seamstress finished pinning my bridesmaid dress. We were standing in the bridal shop's elegant dressing room, surrounded by mirrors and soft lighting that made everything look like a fairy tale. "Jessica," she said, her voice unusually serious. "I need to talk to you about something." I looked at her reflection in the mirror behind me. Even in the harsh fluorescent lighting of the fitting room, she looked perfect. Her wedding dress was a flowing ivory creation with delicate lace sleeves and a train that would photograph beautifully against the garden's backdrop. Her hair was styled in an elegant updo that showed off the diamond earrings Michael had given her for their anniversary. "What's wrong?" I asked, though I could already sense this conversation wasn't going to go well. "It's not wrong, exactly," she said, fidgeting with her engagement ring. "It's just that I've been thinking about the reception, and I'm worried about the speeches." My stomach dropped. As maid of honor, I was expected to give a speech celebrating Amanda and Michael's love story. I'd been working on it for weeks, trying to find the right balance of heartfelt and humorous, personal but not too personal. "What about the speeches?" I asked carefully. Amanda sighed dramatically. "Look, Jessica, I love you, you're my sister, but public speaking has never been your strong suit. You get nervous and you mumble, and honestly, you don't have a lot of life experience to draw from. I mean, what are you going to talk about? Your string of failed jobs? Your non-existent love life?" Each word was like a small knife, precise and deliberate. This was Amanda at her cruelest, hiding her insults behind fake concern and sisterly love. "I've written something nice," I said quietly. "I think you'll like it." "I'm sure you have," she said, her tone suggesting the opposite. "But I've decided to ask Michael's sister Claire to give the maid of honor speech instead. She's more comfortable in front of crowds, and she has some really sweet stories about their relationship that I think will be more meaningful." I stared at her reflection, waiting for the punchline or the smile that would indicate this was some kind of joke. But Amanda's expression was perfectly serious. She was demoting me from maid of honor to decoration, and she was doing it 3 weeks before her wedding. "So what exactly do you want me to do at the reception?" I asked, proud of how steady my voice sounded. "Just be there," she said with a shrug. "Look pretty, dance if anyone asks you. Try not to spill anything on your dress. Simple tasks that even you should be able to handle." That night, I went home and cried for the first time in months. Not because I was devastated about the speech, although that hurt. I cried because I realized that no matter how much I changed or grew or accomplished, my family would always see me as the same disappointing person I'd been at 22. To them, I would always be the sister who couldn't hold down a job, who had never been in a serious relationship, who was just barely competent enough to exist in their orbit without causing too much embarrassment. But then I dried my tears and got back to work. Because while Amanda was worried about seating charts and centerpieces, I was building something that mattered. My business had grown to 37 clients across 3 counties. I'd hired 4 part-time employees and was in negotiations to partner with a web development firm in the state capital. I'd been featured in the Regional Business Journal and invited to speak at a conference for women entrepreneurs. I was successful in ways that Amanda couldn't even imagine, and I'd done it all while playing the role of supportive sister and dutiful daughter. I'd smiled through family dinners where they talked about Amanda's career like it was the most important thing in the world. I'd listened to my mother brag about Amanda's promotion while never mentioning that I'd just signed a contract worth more than Amanda made in 6 months. The morning of Amanda's wedding dawned clear and beautiful, with the kind of golden sunlight that photographers dream about. Riverside Gardens looked like something out of a magazine, with white roses and baby's breath arranged in elegant displays throughout the ceremony space. The reception area was set up under a massive white tent, with round tables covered in ivory linens and centerpieces that probably cost more than my first car. I arrived at the venue early to help with last-minute preparations, wearing my dusty rose bridesmaid dress and the fake smile I'd perfected over the past 6 months. Amanda was in full bride mode, directing vendors and adjusting flower arrangements with the intensity of a conductor leading a symphony orchestra. "Jessica," she called out when she saw me, "thank God you're here. I need you to make sure the gift table is organized properly." Some people apparently don't understand alphabetical order. I spent the morning running errands and solving minor crises, from tracking down missing boutonnieres to convincing a crying flower girl that her basket of petals was perfect just as it was. Through it all, I kept thinking about how different this day could have been if Amanda knew who I really was now. If she knew about my business, my success, my plans for the future. But she didn't know, and I wasn't sure I wanted her to. The ceremony was beautiful in the way that expensive weddings always are. Amanda looked stunning walking down the aisle on my father's arm, and Michael's face when he saw her was genuinely touching. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, full of promises about growing old together and supporting each other's dreams. My mother cried elegant tears that didn't smudge her makeup. My father beamed with pride. I stood at the altar in my designated spot, holding Amanda's bouquet and watching my sister marry a good man who clearly adored her. And despite everything that had happened between us, despite all the ways she'd hurt me and dismissed me and made me feel small, I was genuinely happy for her in that moment. Love was love, and they had found something real together. The reception started smoothly enough. The band played jazz standards during cocktail hour while guests mingled and complimented the decorations. Dinner was served without any major disasters. The photographer captured countless moments of joy and celebration. Claire gave a perfectly adequate maid of honor speech that hit all the expected notes about love and friendship and happily ever after. I was sitting at the head table picking at my chicken cordon bleu and watching couples dance to the band's rendition of At Last when I saw her. Patricia Williams, the owner of Riverside Gardens, was walking across the reception area with the confident stride of someone who knew exactly where she belonged. She was an elegant woman in her 50s, with silver hair styled in a sophisticated bob and the kind of understated jewelry that whispered rather than shouted about wealth. My heart stopped. Patricia was one of my clients. She'd hired my company 8 months ago to overhaul Riverside Gardens' entire digital marketing strategy. We'd worked together to redesign their website, launch a social media campaign, and create an email marketing system that had increased their bookings by 40%. She knew me as Jessica Chen, CEO of Millbrook Marketing Solutions. She had no idea I was also Jessica Chen, disappointing younger sister of the bride. Our eyes met across the crowded reception tent, and I saw the exact moment when recognition dawned on her face. She smiled and started walking toward our table with the kind of purposeful movement that suggested she was planning to say hello to an old friend. I felt panic rising in my throat. Amanda was sitting right next to me, laughing at something Michael had whispered in her ear. My parents were at the next table over, sharing a dance to their wedding song. My entire family was about to discover the secret I'd been keeping for almost a year. Patricia reached our table just as Amanda turned around to grab her water glass. She was wearing her wedding dress like armor, radiating happiness and confidence and the absolute certainty that this was her day, and everyone in attendance was there to celebrate her magnificence. "Excuse me," Patricia said politely, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to running high-end events. "I don't mean to interrupt, but I wanted to say hello." Amanda looked up with her practiced bride smile, the one she'd been using all day with vendors and distant relatives and anyone else who wasn't important enough to merit her genuine attention. "Of course," Amanda said graciously. "Thank you so much for making our day so special." Everything has been absolutely perfect. Patricia smiled and nodded, but her attention wasn't on Amanda. She was looking directly at me with the kind of professional warmth that comes from months of successful collaboration. "Hi, boss," she said. The silence that followed Patricia's greeting stretched like taffy in the summer heat. Amanda's bride smile froze on her face, transforming from gracious to confused in the span of a heartbeat. Michael looked between Patricia and me with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle without all the pieces. My mother, who had been chatting with the couple at the next table, turned around at the sound of an unfamiliar voice addressing her younger daughter with such familiarity. "I'm sorry," Amanda said slowly, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she suspected someone was playing a joke she wasn't in on. "Did you just call my sister your boss?" Patricia's eyebrows rose slightly, and I could see the exact moment she realized she'd stepped into some kind of family dynamic she didn't understand. She was a smart businesswoman who had built Riverside Gardens from a small catering company into the premier wedding venue in 3 counties. She didn't get to where she was by misreading social situations. "Yes," Patricia said carefully, looking between Amanda and me. "Jessica is the CEO of Millbrook Marketing Solutions. We've been working together for the better part of a year. She's transformed our entire digital presence." The words hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. I watched my sister's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. But it was my mother's gasp that cut through the ambient noise of the reception like a knife through silk. "Jessica?" My father's voice came from behind me, low and careful. "What is this woman talking about?" I turned to face my family, these people who had known me my entire life but apparently hadn't known me at all. My father was standing with his hand still on my mother's shoulder from their dance, his expression shifting from confusion to something that looked almost like suspicion. My mother had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup, her hand pressed to her chest like she was having trouble breathing. "I run a marketing company," I said simply, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "I have for almost a year now." "You run a what?" Amanda's voice cracked on the last word. She stood up from her chair so quickly that her wedding dress rustled like autumn leaves. "What do you mean you run a marketing company? You work at Henderson's department store." "I quit Henderson's 6 months ago," I said, meeting her eyes directly. "I've been running my business full-time since then." Patricia, bless her heart, seemed to realize she'd stumbled into a family revelation that was far more complicated than a simple case of mistaken identity. "Perhaps I should leave you all to talk," she said diplomatically. "Jessica, we can catch up another time. Congratulations on your beautiful wedding," she added to Amanda before retreating with the practiced grace of someone who had navigated countless social minefields in her career. But Amanda wasn't ready to let this go. She was staring at me like I'd just announced I was secretly a spy or a lottery winner, or someone else entirely. "This is impossible," she said, her voice rising enough that people at nearby tables were starting to glance in our direction. "You don't know anything about running a business. You can barely keep a job for more than a few months." "Apparently she does know something about it," Michael said quietly, and I could hear genuine surprise in his voice. He was looking at me with new eyes, like he was seeing me clearly for the first time. "If she's working with Patricia Williams, she must be doing something right. Riverside Gardens doesn't exactly hire amateurs." "Thank you," I said to Michael, grateful for his support even though I could see it was causing tension between him and Amanda. "Don't thank him," Amanda snapped. "This is ridiculous. You're lying. You're making this up for attention because it's my wedding day, and you can't stand that it's not about you for once." The accusation hit me like cold water. After everything I'd built, everything I'd accomplished, my sister's first instinct was still to assume I was lying. Not just mistaken or confused, but actively deceiving everyone for the sake of drama and attention. "Why would I lie about this?" I asked, keeping my voice level even though I could feel anger building in my chest like steam in a kettle. "Because that's what you do," Amanda said, her voice getting louder and sharper. "You create problems, you make scenes, you find ways to ruin important moments because you're jealous that other people are successful, and you're not." Several guests were definitely staring now. I could see heads turning at tables across the reception tent. people pausing their conversations to watch the drama unfolding at the head table. The band was still playing, but some of the dancers had stopped to look in our direction. "Amanda?" my father said, his voice carrying a warning. "Lower your voice. People are watching." "Let them watch," Amanda said, but she did drop her volume slightly. "I want them to see what kind of person my sister really is. I want them to understand why I've spent my entire life having to apologize for her behavior." My mother finally found her voice. "Jessica, sweetheart, if this is true, why didn't you tell us? Why have you been keeping this secret?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself for months. Why had I hidden my success from the people who were supposed to love me most? Why had I continued to play the role of the disappointing daughter even after I'd proven to myself that I was capable of so much more? "Because I knew this would happen," I said, gesturing toward Amanda. "I knew you wouldn't believe me. I knew you'd find ways to minimize it, or explain it away, or make it about something else entirely." "That's not true," my mother protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it?" I asked. "Amanda just accused me of lying about my own life for attention." Dad asked what Patricia was talking about, like she might be confused or mistaken about who I am. None of you considered, even for a second, that maybe I'd actually accomplished something worth celebrating. "Because you haven't," Amanda said flatly. "I don't know what kind of scam you're running or what you've convinced this woman to believe, but you are not the CEO of anything. You're 23 years old, with no business experience and no qualifications. You couldn't even handle working at a coffee shop." The coffee shop comment was particularly cruel because Amanda knew how much that failure had hurt me. I'd been fired from being there, done that after 3 months because I'd had a panic attack during the morning rush and dropped a tray of drinks. It had been one of my lowest moments, and Amanda had watched me cry about it at a family dinner 2 years ago. "You're right," I said, standing up from my chair. "I couldn't handle working at a coffee shop. But I could handle building a business from nothing. I could handle learning web design and social media marketing and client relations and accounting. I could handle hiring employees and managing projects and growing revenue month after month. Apparently, I could handle a lot of things that none of you thought I was capable of." "Prove it," Amanda said, crossing her arms over her chest. Her wedding dress was wrinkled now from all the standing and gesturing, and her carefully styled hair was starting to come loose from its pins. "If you're really running some successful company, prove it. Show us contracts or bank statements or something real." I pulled my phone out of my small clutch purse and opened the banking app for my business account. The balance that showed on the screen represented almost a year of 18-hour days, countless cups of coffee, and more determination than I'd known I possessed. I turned the phone around so my family could see the number. My mother's sharp intake of breath was audible even over the background noise of the reception. My father's eyes widened as he processed what he was seeing. Michael let out a low whistle that suggested he understood exactly how impressive that balance was for a year-old company. Amanda stared at the screen for a long moment, her face cycling through emotions too quickly for me to track. When she finally looked up at me, her expression had hardened into something cold and brittle. "So what?" she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You made some money. That doesn't make you successful. That doesn't make you important. Real success isn't about numbers in a bank account. It's about building something meaningful, something that matters. It's about having people respect you and look up to you." "Like they respect and look up to you?" I asked, and immediately regretted the sarcasm in my voice. "Yes, actually," Amanda said. "Like they respect me. I have a real job with a real company. I have a husband who loves me, and parents who are proud of me. I have friends and colleagues who value my contributions. I have a husband made what I do or lie about my accomplishments because I'm not ashamed of my life." "I'm not ashamed of my life," I said quietly. "I was protecting it. There's a difference." "Protecting it from what? From your own family?" "From this," I said, gesturing at the scene we'd created. "From exactly this conversation. From having my accomplishments questioned and dismissed and turned into something ugly." Amanda laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Your accomplishments? Jessica, you're delusional." Running some little website thing from your apartment doesn't make you an entrepreneur. It makes you self-employed. There's a difference between building a real business and playing pretend on the internet. 37 clients across 3 counties, I said, my voice getting stronger. 4 employees. Partnerships with web development firms and graphic design studios. Featured in Regional Business Journal. Invited to speak at the Women's Entrepreneurship Conference next month. Is that pretend enough for you? Each accomplishment I listed seemed to hit Amanda like a physical blow. I could see her processing the information, trying to reconcile the sister she thought she knew with the woman standing in front of her. But instead of pride or excitement or even simple acknowledgement, what I saw in her eyes was something darker. Envy. You know what I think? Amanda said, stepping closer to me. I think you've been lying to us for months. I think you've been pretending to struggle while secretly making money, letting mom and dad worry about you, letting them give you advice about finding yourself and figuring out your life. I think you've been playing victim while actually being successful, and that makes you manipulative and cruel. The accusation stung because there was a grain of truth in it. I had let my parents worry about me. I had accepted their concern and their gentle suggestions about career paths and life choices, while knowing that I was already building something they couldn't have imagined. But I hadn't done it to be cruel. I'd done it because I was scared. I wasn't ready to tell you, I said honestly. I needed to make sure it was real first. I needed to prove to myself that I could do it before I tried to prove it to anyone else. Well, congratulations, Amanda said, her voice turning vicious. You proved you could lie to your family for a year. You proved you could let us think you were failing while you were actually succeeding. What a wonderful sister you turned out to be. What kind of sister are you? I shot back, my composure finally cracking. What kind of person hears that their sibling built a successful business and immediately looks for ways to tear them down? What kind of sister accuses someone of lying about their own life instead of being happy for them? The kind of sister who knows you, Amanda said coldly. The kind of sister who has watched you quit and fail and give up on everything you've ever tried. The kind of sister who knows that this is probably just another one of your phases that will crash and burn in 6 months. Amanda, that's enough, my father said sharply, but she wasn't finished. You want to know what kind of sister I am? Amanda continued, her voice rising again. I'm the kind of sister who has spent her entire life covering for you, making excuses for your failures. Pretending to be proud of you when you couldn't even graduate college without changing your major 3 times. I'm the kind of sister who has had to watch our parents worry about you constantly while trying to live my own life and achieve my own goals. Nobody asked you to cover for me, I said, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. Nobody had to ask, Amanda spat. It was either that or watch our parents be embarrassed by you in front of their friends and colleagues. Do you have any idea what it's like to have people ask about your sister and not know what to tell them? Do you know how many times I've had to deflect questions about what you're doing with your life because the honest answer was nothing? The words were designed to hurt, and they did. Every single one of them landed exactly where Amanda intended, opening old wounds I thought had healed. But underneath the pain, I felt something else rising. Anger. Real, clean anger at the unfairness of it all. So let me get this straight, I said, my voice gaining strength. When you thought I was a failure, you were embarrassed by me. Now that you know I'm successful, you're angry at me for not sharing that success with you. When exactly was I supposed to get this right? When was I supposed to be enough for you? Amanda's eyes flashed with something dangerous. You want to know when you would have been enough? Never. Because this isn't about your little business or your bank account or whatever lies you've been telling yourself. This is about who you are as a person. And you, Jessica, are fundamentally broken. You are selfish and sneaky and completely incapable of being honest about anything that matters. The reception had grown quieter around us. Even the band seemed to be playing more softly, as if they sensed the tension in the air. Guests were definitely staring now, some of them filming with their phones. Amanda's perfect wedding was becoming a spectacle, and it was my fault for not keeping my mouth shut. Amanda, Michael said quietly, reaching for her arm. Maybe we should take a break. Talk about this later, when things aren't so heated. She shook him off without looking away from me. No, I'm done pretending. I'm done protecting her feelings and making excuses for her behavior. You want to know what you really are, Jessica? I braced myself, knowing that whatever came next was going to be designed to destroy me. You're worthless, Amanda said, her voice carrying across the reception tent like a bell. You've always been worthless, and you always will be. Money doesn't change that. Success doesn't change that. Nothing changes the fact that you are fundamentally, completely worthless. The words hit me like a physical blow, so unexpected and cruel that I actually took a step backward. Around us, the reception had gone almost completely silent. Even the band had stopped playing. Every eye in the tent was on us, watching my sister destroy me on what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. I felt something break inside me, but it wasn't what Amanda intended. It wasn't my spirit, or my confidence, or my sense of self-worth. It was the last thread of obligation I felt toward this family. The last remnant of the little girl who had spent her whole life trying to earn love that was apparently never going to come. Thank you, I said quietly, my voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. Amanda blinked, clearly not expecting that response. What? Thank you for finally being honest, I said. Thank you for showing me exactly what you think of me, and exactly what kind of person you really are. Thank you for making this easy. I turned to face my parents, who were standing frozen beside their table like they'd been turned to stone. My mother's hand was pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. My father was staring at Amanda like he didn't recognize her. Mom, Dad, I said, my voice steady and clear. I love you both. But I'm done with this. I'm done pretending that this family dynamic is normal or healthy or something I need to accept. I'm done making myself smaller so other people can feel bigger. I reached into my purse and pulled out my car keys, grateful that I'd driven myself to the venue instead of riding with my parents as originally planned. Jessica, wait, my mother said, finally finding her voice. Please don't leave. We can work this out. No, I said, shaking my head. We can't. Because this isn't about tonight. This isn't about one argument at one wedding. This is about 23 years of being treated like an afterthought in my own family. This is about building something I'm proud of, and having my own sister call me worthless for achieving it. I looked directly at Amanda, who was standing in her wrinkled wedding dress with tears of rage streaming down her cheeks. I hope you have a wonderful marriage, I said sincerely. I hope Michael makes you happy, but I won't be part of your life anymore. I won't subject myself to this kind of treatment, and I won't pretend that what just happened was acceptable. You can't just leave, Amanda said, her voice breaking. This is my wedding. You're my maid of honor. No, I said, looking around at the silent crowd of guests who were still staring at us like we were actors in some terrible play. I was your maid of honor. Now I'm just someone who's going home. I walked toward the exit of the reception tent, my heels clicking against the temporary flooring with each step. Behind me, I could hear Amanda calling my name, her voice high and desperate. I could hear my mother saying something about family and forgiveness, and not making decisions in anger. I could hear the low murmur of guests beginning to whisper among themselves about what they'd just witnessed. But I didn't stop walking. Patricia Williams was standing near the entrance to the venue's main building, probably trying to figure out how to salvage what was left of the reception. When she saw me approaching, her expression shifted from professional concern to genuine sympathy. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. "I will be," I said, and realized I meant it. "Patricia, I'm sorry about the scene in there. I never intended for my personal life to disrupt your venue or your reputation." She waved my concern away with a graceful gesture. "Honey, I've been in the wedding business for 15 years. Trust me, I've seen worse. Family drama comes with the territory." "Still," I said, "if this affects our business relationship in any way." "It won't," Patricia said firmly. "Your personal life is your personal life. Your professional work speaks for itself, and it's been exceptional. Don't let what happened in there make you doubt your value or your abilities." I felt tears prick at my eyes for the first time since the confrontation started. After everything my family had said, having this woman I respected defend my worth meant more than I could express. "Thank you," I managed. "You're welcome," Patricia said. "Now go home, pour yourself a glass of wine, and remember that you built something remarkable. Don't let anyone take that away from you. I drove home through the quiet streets of Millbrook as the sun set behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. My phone was buzzing constantly with text messages from my parents, from Michael, even from some of the wedding guests who had witnessed the confrontation. But I didn't look at any of them. Instead, I thought about Patricia's words. I had built something remarkable. Despite my family's doubts and criticisms, despite my own fears and insecurities, I had created a business that mattered. I had clients who trusted me, employees who depended on me, and a future that was entirely my own. When I got home to my little one-bedroom apartment, I changed out of my bridesmaid dress and into comfortable clothes. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, looking at the business I'd built. Emails from clients praising recent campaigns. Messages from other entrepreneurs asking for advice. Invoices that represented months of hard work and dedication. This was my life. This was what I'd accomplished. And for the first time in 23 years, I didn't need anyone else's approval to know that it was enough. My phone rang, and I saw my mother's name on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, then it rang again, and again. Finally, I turned it off completely. Tomorrow, I would deal with the aftermath. Tomorrow, I would figure out how to move forward with my family, relationships, or whether to move forward at all. Tomorrow, I would start the process of building a life that was truly my own. But tonight, I was going to sit in my kitchen and appreciate everything I'd created, in spite of the people who were supposed to believe in me most. Tonight, I was going to be proud of the woman I'd become, even if no one else was. 3 weeks passed in a strange kind of silence. My phone stopped buzzing with frantic calls from my mother after the first few days. The stream of text messages from extended family members who had heard about the wedding incident eventually slowed to a trickle. Even Amanda went quiet, which was perhaps the most unsettling development of all. My sister had never been one to let conflicts simmer without resolution. She was the type of person who needed to have the last word, to control the narrative, to ensure that everyone understood her side of the story. But this time was different. This time the silence felt heavy with the weight of words that couldn't be taken back. I threw myself into work with the kind of intensity that bordered on obsession. If my family wanted to believe I was worthless, I would prove them wrong through sheer force of productivity. I expanded my client base, launched new service offerings, and began developing partnerships with businesses in neighboring states. My employees started joking that I lived at the office, which wasn't far from the truth considering I was often there until midnight and back again by 7 in the morning. Derek Martinez, my business partner and the closest thing I had to a best friend these days, finally cornered me on a Thursday afternoon in late June. He was 5 years older than me, a former corporate marketing executive who had left his 6-figure job to start his own consulting firm. We'd met at a networking event 8 months earlier, and had been collaborating on projects ever since. 3 months ago, we'd made our partnership official, combining our companies into a single entity that was stronger than either of us could have built alone. "All right," Derek said, closing my laptop despite my protests. "Intervention time. You've been working like someone possessed for weeks. What's going on?" I looked up at him from my desk, taking in his concerned expression and the coffee he'd brought me without being asked. Derek was one of the few people in my life who saw me as I actually was, rather than as a collection of failures and disappointments. He'd watched me grow from a nervous freelancer into a confident business owner, and he'd never once questioned my capabilities or my worth. "Nothing's going on," I said, reaching for my laptop. "I'm just busy. We have deadlines." "We have manageable deadlines," Derek corrected, keeping the laptop out of my reach. "We also have employees who are perfectly capable of handling the workload. What we don't have is a Jessica who's been sleeping more than 4 hours a night or eating actual meals instead of surviving on coffee and granola bars." I slumped back in my chair, feeling the exhaustion I'd been pushing away for weeks finally catch up with me. I had a fight with my family at my sister's wedding. It was bad. How bad? The kind of bad where strangers were filming it with their phones and posting it on social media. The kind of bad where the bride called her maid of honor worthless in front of 200 guests. Derek's eyebrows shot up. "Jesus, Jessica, why didn't you tell me?" Because talking about it makes it real, I said quietly. And I've been trying very hard to pretend it didn't happen. That's not sustainable, Derek said gently. You can't work yourself to death to avoid dealing with family drama. Trust me, I've tried. It doesn't work. Derek had his own complicated family situation. His parents had immigrated from Mexico when he was 10, and they'd never quite understood his decision to leave corporate security for the uncertain world of entrepreneurship. But even at their most disapproving, they'd never called him worthless at a public event. What exactly happened? Derek asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. I told him everything. About hiding my business success from my family, about Amanda's reaction when Patricia recognized me, about the public confrontation that had ended with me walking out of my sister's wedding reception. Derek listened without interrupting, his expression growing more incredulous with each detail. Let me get this straight, he said when I finished. Your sister found out you were successful, and her immediate response was to call you a liar and then publicly humiliate you? That's a simplified version, but yes. And your parents just stood there and let it happen? My father tried to get her to lower her voice because people were staring. My mother asked why I hadn't told them about the business. Neither of them actually defended me or told Amanda she was out of line. Derek ran his hands through his dark hair. A gesture I'd learned meant he was trying to process something that didn't make sense to him. Jessica, you know that's not normal, right? You know that families are supposed to celebrate each other's successes, not tear each other down? I know that intellectually, I said. But knowing something and feeling it are different things. I've spent my whole life in this dynamic. Part of me wonders if maybe Amanda was right. Maybe I am selfish for keeping the business secret. Maybe I should have told them from the beginning. Why? Derek asked. So they could have found different ways to minimize your accomplishments? So they could have spent months questioning your decisions and offering unsolicited advice about how to run your business? He had a point. I knew my family well enough to predict their reactions to my success. My mother would have worried constantly about the financial risks and the lack of traditional employment benefits. My father would have wanted to see business plans and financial projections and proof that I wasn't making a mistake. Amanda would have found ways to remind me that her corporate job was more stable and respectable than my entrepreneurial venture. Maybe, I admitted, but at least it would have been honest. Honesty goes both ways, Derek said firmly. When was the last time any of them asked about your life? When was the last time they showed genuine interest in what you were doing or how you were feeling? You can't have an honest relationship with people who don't actually want to know who you are. I thought about that for a moment. Derek was right. Most conversations with my family centered around Amanda's job, Amanda's relationship, Amanda's wedding plans. When they did ask about my life, it was usually in the context of offering advice or expressing concern about my lack of direction. They'd never asked about my dreams or my goals or what I wanted to build for myself. So what do I do now, I asked. Pretend they don't exist? Cut them out of my life completely? I don't know, Derek said honestly. But I do know you can't keep working 18-hour days to avoid thinking about it. That's not solving anything. It's just postponing the inevitable breakdown. He was right, of course. I was using work as a drug, numbing myself with productivity and achievement to avoid dealing with the pain of my family's rejection. But avoidance wasn't a long-term strategy. Eventually, I would have to face the reality of what had happened and decide how to move forward. That evening, I went home to my apartment and did something I hadn't done since the wedding. I sat still. No laptop, no client calls, no urgent emails to answer. I just sat on my couch with a cup of tea and let myself feel everything I'd been pushing away for 3 weeks. The hurt was overwhelming. Despite everything I'd accomplished, despite the business I'd built and the success I'd achieved, my sister's words still echoed in my head. Worthless. Fundamentally broken. Completely incapable of being honest about anything that matters. Each phrase felt like a small knife, cutting away at the confidence I'd worked so hard to build. But underneath the hurt was something else. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind that had flared during the confrontation, but something colder and more permanent. I was angry at Amanda for choosing cruelty over celebration. I was angry at my parents for enabling her behavior and failing to protect me. But mostly, I was angry at myself for caring so much about the opinions of people who had never really seen me. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, my heart jumped with the hope that it might be an apology from Amanda, or a message from my parents asking me to come home so we could work things out. Instead, it was from Patricia Williams. "Hi Jessica, I wanted to reach out and see how you're doing after the wedding. I've been thinking about you and hoping you're okay. Would you like to have coffee sometime this week? My treat." I stared at the message for a long time, surprised by how much it meant to me. Here was someone who barely knew me personally, but who valued our professional relationship enough to check on my well-being. Someone who had witnessed my family's treatment of me and wanted to offer support rather than judgment. I typed back quickly before I could overthink it. I would love that. Thank you for reaching out. We met 2 days later at a small cafe downtown, the kind of place with mismatched furniture and local artwork on the walls. Patricia was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee and the kind of warm smile that made you feel immediately welcome. "How are you holding up?" she asked as I sat down across from her. "I'm managing," I said, which was the most honest answer I could give. "Thank you for this. You didn't have to reach out." "Of course I did," Patricia said firmly. "What happened at the wedding was completely unacceptable. I've been in business long enough to recognize talent when I see it, and I've also been alive long enough to recognize family dysfunction when I see it. You deserved better." The simple validation brought tears to my eyes. After weeks of questioning myself and wondering if maybe Amanda had been right about my character flaws, hearing someone I respected affirm my worth was like finding water in a desert. I keep replaying it, I admitted, wondering if I should have handled it differently. If I should have told them about the business from the beginning, or if I should have stayed and tried to work things out instead of leaving. Patricia shook her head decisively. "Jessica, I've raised 3 daughters. I know what family conflict looks like, and what I witnessed at that reception went far beyond normal sibling rivalry. Your sister was deliberately cruel, and she did it in front of a crowd of people who will remember that moment for years to come. You had every right to protect yourself by leaving." "But it was her wedding day," I said. "I ruined her wedding day." "You didn't ruin anything," Patricia said, her voice firm. "She made choices that led to that confrontation. She chose to attack you instead of celebrating your success. She chose to air family business in front of her wedding guests. She chose to prioritize her own ego over your dignity. Those were her choices, not yours." I took a sip of my coffee and tried to absorb what Patricia was saying. For 3 weeks I'd been carrying the guilt of walking out on Amanda's wedding, feeling like I'd somehow failed as a sister and a family member. But maybe Patricia was right. Maybe leaving had been the right choice. Maybe staying would have only made things worse. "What happens now?" I asked. "How do I move forward from this?" Patricia considered the question carefully. "I think that depends on what you want your life to look like. Do you want to rebuild these relationships, or do you want to focus on building new ones? There's no right or wrong answer, but you need to be honest with yourself about what's best for your mental health and your future happiness." It was a question I'd been avoiding for weeks, but I knew the answer had been building inside me since the moment I walked out of that reception tent. I didn't want to rebuild these relationships. Not because I didn't love my family, but because they'd shown me that their love came with conditions I couldn't meet. They loved the version of me that struggled and needed their guidance. They couldn't handle the version of me that succeeded and thrived independently. "I think I want to focus on building new relationships," I said quietly. "I think I need to surround myself with people who see my worth, instead of people who make me question it." Patricia smiled and raised her coffee cup in a small toast. "To new beginnings, then." Over the next several weeks, I began to construct a life that was truly my own. I stopped checking my phone for messages from my family. I stopped driving past my childhood home, hoping to see a sign that they missed me. I stopped making excuses for their behavior, or trying to find ways to fix relationships that had been broken long before the wedding confrontation. Instead, I focused on the relationships that brought joy and support into my life. Derek and I expanded our business partnership into a genuine friendship, spending evenings brainstorming new projects and weekends exploring hiking trails outside the city. Patricia became a mentor and eventually a close friend, introducing me to other successful women in the business community who understood the challenges of building something from nothing. I joined a networking group for young entrepreneurs and found myself surrounded by people who celebrated each other's wins instead of competing or comparing. I started dating again, something I'd put on hold while building my business. Nothing serious yet, but I was learning to trust my own judgment about people and to value my own company enough that I didn't need someone else's validation to feel complete. My business continued to grow. We landed our first major corporate client, a regional chain of restaurants that needed a complete digital overhaul. The contract was worth more than I'd made in my first 6 months of operation, and signing it felt like crossing some invisible threshold into legitimate success. Derek and I celebrated by taking our team out for dinner at the nicest restaurant in town, and I realized that these people, these colleagues and friends I'd chosen, felt more like family than my actual family ever had. But success couldn't completely shield me from the pain of loss. Sometimes, late at night when I was alone in my apartment, I would think about Amanda and wonder if she ever regretted what she'd said. I would think about my parents and wonder if they understood why I'd disappeared from their lives. I would see something funny or beautiful or exciting and reach for my phone to share it with my mother before remembering that we weren't speaking anymore. The hardest part wasn't the anger or the hurt, it was the grief. I was grieving the family I'd thought I had, the relationships I'd believed could be healed with enough patience and love and understanding. I was grieving the version of myself that had spent 23 years trying to earn approval that was never going to come. I was grieving the sister I'd thought Amanda could be, the parents I'd hoped my parents would become. But grief, I learned, could coexist with growth. I could miss my family while also acknowledging that my life was better without their constant criticism and disappointment. I could love them from a distance while refusing to subject myself to their toxicity. I could honor the good memories while protecting myself from creating new painful ones. 6 months after the wedding, I received an unexpected email from Michael, Amanda's husband. The subject line was simple: "I owe you an apology." I stared at the email for a long time before opening it, my heart racing with a mixture of hope and anxiety. Part of me wanted to delete it without reading it, to maintain the clean break I'd worked so hard to establish. But another part of me was curious about what he had to say, about whether anyone in my family had gained perspective on what had happened that night. The email was longer than I'd expected, and more thoughtful. Michael wrote about how the months since the wedding had been difficult for him and Amanda, about how the video of our confrontation had gone viral in their social circles, making them the subject of gossip and speculation, about how Amanda had struggled with the aftermath, alternating between justifying her behavior and expressing regret about how things had escalated. But the part that surprised me most was Michael's reflection on his own role in the situation. He wrote about how he'd known for years that Amanda's treatment of me was unfair, but he'd convinced himself it wasn't his place to interfere in family dynamics. He'd watched her diminish my accomplishments and dismiss my struggles, and he'd said nothing because it was easier than confronting the woman he loved about her cruelty. "I should have spoken up for you long before that night," he wrote. "I should have told Amanda that her behavior toward you was unacceptable. I should have recognized your worth, instead of letting her convince me that you were the problem. I failed you as a brother-in-law, and as a decent human being, and I'm sorry." The apology was genuine and well-intentioned, but it also highlighted something I'd been trying not to think about. Everyone had watched Amanda treat me poorly for years. My parents, Michael, extended family members, family friends. They'd all seen it happening, and they'd all chosen to say nothing. They'd all decided that keeping the peace was more important than protecting me from abuse. I closed the email without responding. Not because I didn't appreciate Michael's apology, but because accepting it felt like opening a door I'd worked hard to close. If I forgave Michael, would I be expected to forgive Amanda? Would I be expected to return to family gatherings and pretend that nothing had changed? Would I be expected to rebuild relationships with people who had shown me that their love was conditional and their loyalty was questionable? I wasn't ready for those conversations. Maybe I never would be. And for the first time in my life, I was okay with that uncertainty. I was okay with choosing myself over family obligation. I was okay with building a life based on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than shared history and genetic connection. The email from Michael would be the last communication I received from anyone in my family for a very long time, and honestly, that was exactly what I needed. 2 years passed like pages in a book I was writing for myself. My business had grown beyond anything I'd imagined possible when I first started typing on my laptop in that tiny studio apartment. We'd moved into a real office space downtown, a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the space with natural light. Our team had expanded to 12 full-time employees, and we were working with clients across 4 states. I'd been featured on the cover of Regional Business Magazine, named one of the 30 under 30 rising stars in the State Business Journal, and invited to speak at conferences from Atlanta to Chicago. My bank account reflected the success in numbers that would have seemed impossible when I was counting quarters for laundry money. More importantly, I'd surrounded myself with people who valued my contributions and celebrated my achievements. Derek had become more than a business partner. He was the brother I'd always wanted, someone who challenged me professionally while supporting me personally. When I doubted myself, he reminded me of how far I'd come. When I pushed too hard, he made sure I took time to rest. Our friendship was built on mutual respect and genuine affection, everything my relationship with Amanda had never been. I'd also started dating someone, Marcus Chen, a software developer who'd moved to Millbrook to start his own tech company. We'd met at a networking event, bonded over the challenges of entrepreneurship, and discovered we shared a love of hiking, terrible movies, and experimental cooking. He was kind without being a pushover, ambitious without being ruthless, and he made me laugh in ways I'd forgotten were possible. For the first time in my adult life, I felt genuinely happy. Not the temporary satisfaction that comes from achieving goals, but the deep contentment that comes from building a life that reflects your values and priorities. I'd created something meaningful with people I cared about, and I was finally free from the constant weight of family disapproval. But happiness, I was learning, could be fragile in ways that success couldn't protect against. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October, almost exactly 2 years after Amanda's wedding. I was in my office reviewing proposals for a new client when my assistant knocked on the door. "Jessica," Sarah said, her voice uncharacteristically tentative. "There's someone here to see you. She says she's your mother." My stomach dropped like a stone into deep water. I hadn't spoken to my mother since the wedding, hadn't even seen her around town despite Millbrook's small size. For 2 years, I'd managed to build a life that existed completely separate from my family's orbit. Seeing my mother now felt like having my past and present collide in ways I wasn't prepared to handle. "Should I tell her you're in a meeting?" Sarah asked gently. She knew pieces of my family situation, enough to understand why an unexpected visit from my mother might not be welcome. I considered it. It would be easy to avoid this conversation, to send my mother away and maintain the boundaries I'd worked so hard to establish. But something in Sarah's expression told me this wasn't a casual visit. My mother wouldn't have come to my office, wouldn't have risked the possibility of public rejection, unless something serious had happened. "No," I said finally. "Send her in." My mother looked older than I remembered. Her hair had more gray streaks, her face showed new lines around her eyes, and she carried herself with a weariness that seemed to go deeper than physical exhaustion. She was dressed carefully, wearing the navy blue dress she usually reserved for church and important occasions, but her hands shook slightly as she clutched her purse. "Hello, Jessica," she said softly, standing in my office doorway like she wasn't sure she was welcome to enter. "Hi, Mom," I replied, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "Please, sit down." She settled into the chair and looked around my office with undisguised amazement. The space was beautiful, professional, exactly the kind of environment that announced its occupant was successful and respected. Awards hung on the walls alongside framed photos of company events and client celebrations. A bookshelf held business journals, industry publications, and books on leadership and entrepreneurship. "This is incredible," my mother said quietly. I had no idea it had grown so much. "Thank you," I said, keeping my voice neutral. I wasn't going to make this easy for her by pretending the last 2 years hadn't happened, but I also wasn't going to be cruel. "What brings you here, Mom?" She took a shaky breath and looked down at her hands. "It's your father. He had a heart attack 3 days ago. The words hit me like cold water. Despite everything that had happened between us, despite the silence and the hurt and the carefully constructed distance, my father was still my father, the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had helped with math homework, who had quietly supported my dreams even when he didn't understand them. "Is he okay?" I asked, my professional composure cracking. "He's stable," my mother said. "But it was serious, Jessica. The doctors say he needs surgery. And even then, his recovery will be long and difficult. He's been asking for you." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, but I forced myself to stay focused. "What exactly are the doctors saying? What kind of surgery? What's the prognosis?" My mother explained the medical details as best she could. Triple bypass surgery, weeks of recovery, significant lifestyle changes required. The kind of health crisis that forced families to reevaluate their priorities and consider what really mattered. "He wants to see you," she repeated. "He's been asking about you every day since it happened. He keeps saying he has things he needs to tell you, things he should have said years ago." I closed my eyes and tried to process what I was feeling. Relief that my father was alive. Fear about his health and recovery. Guilt about the 2 years of silence. Anger that it had taken a medical emergency to bring my family to my door. Love for the man who had raised me, despite his failures as a protector during my conflicts with Amanda. "Where is he?" I asked. "Millbrook General," my mother said. "Room 314. The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon." I looked at my calendar, mentally rearranging meetings and deadlines. Whatever issues existed between my family and me, I couldn't live with myself if my father died thinking I didn't care about him. "I'll be there," I said. My mother's face crumpled with relief. "Thank you. Jessica, I know things have been difficult between us, but he needs you right now. We all need you." There was something in her tone that made me look at her more carefully. Beyond the worry about my father's health, there was something else. Something that looked almost like desperation. "Mom," I said gently, "is there something else? Something you're not telling me?" She hesitated, then reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Her hands were trembling as she handed it to me. "This came in yesterday's mail," she said quietly. I unfolded the paper and immediately recognized the letterhead of the mortgage company that held the loan on my parents' house. The contents of the letter were stark and frightening. Notice of default. Foreclosure proceedings would begin in 30 days unless the full amount of outstanding payments was received immediately. "Mom," I said, looking up from the letter. "How much do you owe?" $18,000, she whispered. "We're $18,000 behind on the mortgage." I stared at her, trying to understand how this could have happened. My parents had always been careful with money, conservative in their spending, diligent about paying bills on time. They'd owned their house for 20 years and had never missed a payment in all the time I was growing up. "How did this happen?" I asked. My mother's composure finally broke completely. She began to cry, not the delicate tears she'd shed at Amanda's wedding, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from someplace broken inside her. "It's been building for months," she managed between sobs. "Your father's been having health problems for over a year, but he didn't want to worry anyone. The medical bills started piling up. Then he had to take time off work, and his company doesn't offer good sick leave benefits. We've been using credit cards to cover the mortgage payments, but even those are maxed out now." The picture was becoming clearer, and it was devastating. My parents had been struggling financially for over a year, right around the time I'd been building my successful business and accumulating wealth I'd never dreamed of having. While I'd been celebrating contracts and expansions and awards, they'd been drowning in debt and too proud to ask for help. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "How could we?" my mother asked, looking up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "After what happened at the wedding, after the things Amanda said, after you stopped speaking to us, how could we come to you asking for money? It would have looked like we were only reaching out because we needed something." "But you are only reaching out because you need something," I said, the words coming out harsher than I'd intended. My mother flinched like I'd slapped her. "That's not fair, Jessica. We're reaching out because your father is sick and wants to see his daughter. The money situation is separate." "Is it?" I asked. "Mom, you just handed me a foreclosure notice and told me you need $18,000. If Dad wasn't having surgery, if you weren't about to lose the house, would you be sitting in my office right now?" She opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again. We both knew the answer. "I don't know," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to say yes, but I honestly don't know. The last 2 years have been so hard, Jessica. Not just financially, but emotionally. Losing you, watching Amanda struggle with the aftermath of the wedding, seeing your father's health decline while pretending everything was fine. I don't know what the right thing to do is anymore." Her honesty was more painful than any lie would have been. At least a lie would have given me something concrete to be angry about. The truth left me with the messy complexity of a family that had failed each other in multiple ways, none of them entirely unforgivable, but all of them deeply damaging. "What about Amanda?" I asked. "Can't she help with the money?" My mother's expression grew even more pained. "Amanda and Michael are having their own problems. The wedding cost more than they could afford. And then, with all the social media attention from that night, Amanda had some issues at work. She's been seeing a therapist and taking medication for depression. They're barely keeping their heads above water financially. So Amanda was struggling too. Part of me felt vindicated that her perfect life hadn't been so perfect after all. But a larger part of me just felt sad that my entire family had been falling apart while I had been building a new life that didn't include any of them. "I need time to think about this," I said finally. "Of course," my mother said quickly. "I understand, just please don't take too long. The foreclosure timeline is real, and your father's surgery is tomorrow." After she left, I sat alone in my office trying to process everything I'd learned. My father was seriously ill and wanted to see me. My parents were about to lose their house. Amanda was dealing with depression and financial problems. My family's perfect facade had crumbled while I'd been thriving in their absence. The smart thing would be to stay away. I'd worked hard to build a life free from their drama and dysfunction. I'd surrounded myself with healthy relationships and positive influences. Getting involved now would mean risking all the progress I'd made, potentially opening myself up to manipulation and guilt and all the toxic patterns I'd escaped. But they were still my family. Flawed and hurtful and complicated, but still the people who had raised me and shaped me and loved me in their imperfect way. My father was facing surgery that could determine whether he lived or died. My mother was facing the loss of the home she'd lived in for 2 decades. Could I really turn my back on them when they needed help most? That evening, I called Derek and asked him to meet me for dinner. I needed perspective from someone who understood both my business success and my family situation. We went to a quiet restaurant downtown, and I told him everything my mother had shared. "So what are you thinking?" Derek asked after I'd finished explaining the situation. "I'm thinking I'm trapped," I said honestly. "If I help them, I risk getting pulled back into all the dysfunction I worked so hard to escape. If I don't help them, my father could die thinking I don't care, and my parents could lose their house while I have more money than I know what to do with." Derek nodded thoughtfully. "Those aren't the only options, though. You could help with specific, defined boundaries. Pay for the medical bills and the mortgage arrears, but make it clear that this doesn't mean you're ready to rebuild the relationships. You could be generous without being naive. But what if they expect more? What if paying for this makes them think everything is forgiven, and we can go back to the way things were? Then you'll have to be very clear that's not what's happening," Derek said. "Jessica, you've built an incredible life. You've proven your worth to yourself and to everyone who matters. You don't have to sacrifice your well-being to save your family, but you also don't have to punish them forever. Maybe there's a middle ground where you can help without compromising yourself." I thought about Derek's words as I drove home that night. Maybe he was right. Maybe I could find a way to help my parents without sacrificing the boundaries I'd established. Maybe I could be generous while still protecting myself. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling and thinking about my father in a hospital bed, I realized that the question wasn't really about money or boundaries or family dynamics. The question was about what kind of person I wanted to be. Did I want to be someone who had the power to help but chose not to? Did I want to be someone who let pride and hurt override compassion? The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my bank, arranging for an immediate transfer of $25,000 to my parents, mortgage company, and an additional $10,000 to cover medical expenses. The second was to the hospital, asking to speak with my father's surgeon about his condition and prognosis. Then I got in my car and drove to Millbrook General Hospital for the first time in 2 years, knowing that whatever happened next would change everything again. Walking into that hospital room was like stepping through a portal into a different version of my life. My father looked smaller than I remembered, fragile in his hospital gown with tubes and monitors surrounding his bed. But when he saw me in the doorway, his face lit up with such pure joy that I felt 2 years of carefully constructed walls crumble in an instant. "There's my girl," he whispered, his voice hoarse but warm. "I knew you'd come." I sat beside his bed and took his hand, surprised by how natural it felt despite everything that had happened between us. We talked for hours before his surgery, not about the wedding or the silence or the hurt feelings, but about simpler things. His work, my business, the changes in Millbrook, memories from my childhood that we both treasured. "I'm proud of you," he said as the nurses came to prep him for surgery. "I always have been, even when I didn't know how to show it. What you've built, who you've become, it's remarkable." The surgery went well, and my father's recovery was steady if slow. I found myself spending more time at the hospital than I'd planned, not out of obligation but because I genuinely wanted to be there. My mother and I had careful, tentative conversations about the past and the future. She never directly apologized for enabling Amanda's behavior, but she acknowledged that things had been handled poorly. "We should have protected you better," she said one afternoon as we sat in the hospital cafeteria. "We should have seen how unhappy you were and done something about it instead of just hoping it would work itself out." It wasn't everything I'd wanted to hear, but it was something. A recognition that I'd deserved better, that my feelings had mattered even when they'd been inconvenient. Amanda came to the hospital on the 3rd day. I was reading to my father when she appeared in the doorway looking uncertain and vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before. She'd lost weight, and there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. "Hi," she said quietly. "Hi," I replied, closing my book. We looked at each other across the hospital room, 2 sisters who had once shared everything, and now barely knew how to speak to each other. My father pretended to be asleep, but I could tell he was listening to every word. "I owe you an apology," Amanda said finally. "A real one. Not the half-hearted attempts I've been practicing in therapy. What I said at my wedding was cruel and unfair and completely wrong. You're not worthless. You've never been worthless." I was jealous and scared, and I lashed out in the worst possible way. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity, but all I saw was exhaustion and genuine remorse. "Why?" I asked. "Why were you so angry about my success?" Amanda sat down heavily in the chair by the window. "Because it meant I was wrong about you. For years I'd convinced myself that I was the successful one, the responsible one, the daughter our parents could be proud of. Your struggles made me feel better about myself, and when you succeeded without any help from us, it shattered that narrative completely." Her honesty was startling. I'd expected denial or excuses, not this raw admission of her own insecurities. "I've been in therapy for months," she continued, "working through why I felt the need to tear you down instead of celebrating with you. It's not an excuse for what I did, but it's an explanation. I was threatened by your independence because it highlighted how dependent I was on everyone else's approval." We talked for an hour, carefully navigating years of hurt and misunderstanding. It wasn't a magical reconciliation that erased all the pain, but it was a beginning, an acknowledgement of the damage done and a tentative hope that healing might be possible. 6 months later, my father had recovered enough to return to light work, and my parents had successfully avoided foreclosure. I'd established clear boundaries about my involvement in family finances and my expectations for how I wanted to be treated going forward. The relationships were different now, more honest but also more distant. We saw each other occasionally, spoke regularly, but I maintained my independence and they respected it. Amanda and I developed something that wasn't quite friendship but wasn't hostility either. We were sisters who understood each other better than we ever had before, but who also recognized that we needed space to exist as separate people. She was working on her own issues, and I was continuing to build the life I'd created for myself. My business continued to thrive. Derek and I expanded into new markets, hired more employees, and started a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs. I spoke at conferences about overcoming family obstacles and building success on your own terms. My story resonated with people who had struggled with similar issues, and I found purpose in helping others navigate the complicated terrain of family expectations and personal ambition. Most importantly, I learned that forgiveness didn't require forgetting, and that loving someone didn't mean accepting unacceptable behavior. I could care about my family while also protecting myself from their dysfunction. I could be generous with my success while maintaining boundaries about how I was treated. The woman who had walked out of that wedding reception 2.5 years earlier had been broken but determined. The woman I became was whole and confident, surrounded by people who valued her contributions and celebrated her achievements. I'd built something beautiful from the ashes of those painful family dynamics, and no one could ever take that away from me. Sometimes I think about that night at Riverside Gardens, about Patricia Williams walking over and calling me boss while my sister stood there in shock. It was the moment when two versions of my life collided, when I had to choose between staying small to keep others comfortable or claiming my worth regardless of their approval. I chose myself, and it made all the difference. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.